Okay, we are live.
Thank you. So I'd like to call the special meeting of the San Mateo County Harbor Board of Commissioners to order at 1:04 p.m. on January 29th. Can you do a roll call, please, Melanie?
Commissioner Chan-Corrali,
Present?
Commissioner Matoush,
Here.
Commissioner Lorenas. Oh, you're muted, Ed.
Here.
Commissioner Zemke,
Here.
Commissioner Ryring.
Present.
Great. So it looks like we have a quorum, and then we'll move on to public comment, which I will open up for any comments that the public wishes to make that are on items that are not on the agenda. I don't see anyone in the waiting room, but if you could just double check, Melanie or Lizzie. I don't see any hands raised or anyone in the attendance area.
That's correct. There's no one in the attendance and no hands raised.
Okay, perfect. And I'll close public comment, and then we will go to the consent calendar, section C, for the item on emergency procurement, which is the destruction of abandoned sinking 60-foot commercial fishing vessel. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I so move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Oh, who was first? Was it Tom or?
I think
Commissioner
Tom
Zemke.
and Bill came in at about the same
Tom,
time.
Nancy.
Well, Nancy seconded it, so
Oh, okay.
I heard Bill first, but
I made the motion.
Okay.
Okay. Any discussion? Then we'll do a roll call, please.
Commissioner Matoush,
Aye.
Commissioner Lorenas, Commissioner Zemke,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryring,
Aye.
Commissioner Chan-Corrali.
Aye. So that motion carries, and we'll move on to our discussion items, which is number 2, ethics training for harbor commissioners provided by Richards, Watson and Gershon. RWG are a great general counsel firm, and it looks like we have the esteemed David Lim here with us. Thank you you're doing the training today, David?
David and I are going to share in the training today.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be
great.
assisting Trisha.
Okay, well, thanks
Right.
for being here, Trisha. And then why don't we get started? This is a requirement, right? That's at a minimum of
Yes.
2 hours, right?
Let me start by sharing my screen here. Okay, are you seeing the full screen of the slideshow, or are you seeing the presenter view?
I'm seeing the slideshow or the full screen.
Presenter view.
Oh,
Correct.
how's that?
How do I
That's
dump
correct.
out of the
Better.
commissioner view and get into the full screen view?
At the top right of your screen, there should be an option for how you want to view it. So it should say view, and there should be an option for gallery, speaker, or full screen.
So what do I want? Speaker or standard?
I would try standard. Speaker will show mostly the speaker's face.
Perfect. Perfect.
All right. You want me to get started now?
Yeah, but before you get started, I forgot to make one announcement, just a quick announcement. So the commissioners should be receiving or have received an email from the general manager about possibly having a special meeting on February 10th. So please look at that email and respond to Jim when you get a chance.
All right.
Thank you.
So you want me to start now, President? Yeah, okay.
Yes,
Okay,
thanks.
Got it. Okay, so good afternoon. I'm here with my colleague, David Lim, to provide you this training course. All of you know me, but I'd like to give David a few minutes to introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Lim. I'm an attorney with Richards, Watson and Gershon. I'm in the public law department, and I assist Trisha with, various issues related to her work as counsel for all of you fine people at the Harbor District. Some of you may know me previously when I was on the San Mateo City Council. Some of your names are definitely familiar, and I think I've met some of you at various events. So it's nice to see you all again. But today, obviously, I'm wearing the hat as your attorney who will be helping you with your ethics training. So I'll try to keep it light and fun, and we'll kind of move it along and get your 2 hours of requirements and in and out. So it's nice to meet all of you.
All right. Thank you, David. So it'll be good. This is, as Virginia mentioned, this is a 2-hour course. And so it's helpful to have 2 attorneys because there's a lot of material. And so this will give us an opportunity to kind of go back and forth, and you can see a fresh face and hear the material from somebody else too. So this course is about open government and pointing out the possible pitfalls that you can run into as a public official. And you're taking this because the legislature adopted AB 1234 in 2005 to require ethics training for local government officials. And there are more than 24 laws that we're going to have to cover as required by law. So you might not remember all of the details about what we cover here, but this is important to develop a good understanding about general ethical principles. So let's get started. It seems that it might be easy to know when you're being ethical. However, the law is just not concerned about whether or not you're taking personal advantage of your public office. It's intended also to make sure you avoid situations where you would take advantage of your office. And the other thing is that not in ethics are obvious. So it's possible that you can be a very ethical person and then unintentionally you violate these rules. So here's a quick quiz about the principles that we will cover today. And it's true or false. As long as the action is legal, it's ethical. Ethics laws are largely a matter of common sense. The ends means. It doesn't matter how as long as the end result they're above worrying about public perception. And the answer to each of these is false. And the reason for that is that as public officials, we need to not only satisfy legal standards, but also ethical standards that the public holds us to. And as you all know, the legal nuances do not satisfy the public, and they end up being kind of political losers. So it's helpful to remind ourselves as we're looking at this that we view the law as the floor for ethical conduct and not the ceiling for ethical conduct. Another reason that it's helpful to regularly do this training is that as a human, you encounter a lot of moral dilemmas that make it tough to see the correct path for you as a public official. For example, there might be personal cost to doing the right thing, or doing the right thing will cause harm to others. And finally, sometimes it's just not clear what's right. There are 3 principles of good government that provide guidance for these rules that we will cover. The first is transparency. And with transparency, it's just easier to keep than keeping secrets. And it also builds confidence and trust in the organization. The second major principle is that process is important. Good process facilitates thoughtful and informed debate, and that leads to better decision making. Good process also results in predictability, which makes others want to work with the organization. And then finally, ethical principles and practices avoid bad publicity. And bad publicity can tarnish the district's reputation and make it difficult to carry out its government functions. Finally, it's important to have a strong foundation of the ethical principles because the conduct of individual public officials is directly related to how the public will view the district as an institution. So AB 1234 requires us to cover 4 groups of ethics laws. I'll start off by talking about personal financial gain. And then David's going to follow talking about personal advantages and perks. Then I will come back and discuss governmental transparency, like the Brown Act. And then David will finish up with the laws relating to fair process. So let's begin with personal financial gain. Here we have three key laws that deal with personal financial gain. They are the Political Reform Act, which provides rules about disclosure of conflicts and when you need to disqualify from taking action. The second is Government Code Section 1090, which provides rules about conflicts of interest in decisions involving contracts. And the third set of rules relates to improper use of public office to secure prospective employment. The Political Reform Act, sometimes referred to as the PRA, was enacted in 1974 by the California voters. And this was in the wake of the Watergate scandal, and states all over the country were enacting similar laws. The act created the Fair Political Practice Commission, or the FPPC, who enforces the act. And then they also issue implementing regulations, which they revise quite frequently. A core requirement of the Political Reform Act is disclosure of economic interests. So when you run
Excuse
for
me,
office,
Tricia,
yeah,
there's someone in the back like rustling some papers
Oh,
or something. I
got
don't
it.
know what's going on, but it's overpowering what you're saying.
Oh, got it. Okay, that's helpful to know. Thank you.
Thanks
Okay, is that better?
much. Thank you.
Okay, I think I was resting something on the computer. Thank you. Okay, so a core requirement of the Political Reform Act is the requirement for public officials to disclose their economic interests. So as you know, when you run for office, upon assuming office and then every year afterwards, you must fill out a Form 700. And its purpose is to prevent conflicts by letting the public know your interests. You must disclose your sources of income, your real property interests, investments, business entities that you own, and sources of gifts. Is that better, Virginia or President? Okay, thank you. Okay, the Form 700 statements are a public record, so the public can look at the financial interests of the decision makers. And then there are also penalties for failure to or for late filing of the form. And accurate reporting prevents conflicts of interest and increases public confidence. So it's important to get it right, because the failure to report your interests will almost always lead to suspicions on the part of the FPPC or the public or even the press. There are other types of disclosures, such as reporting campaign contributions and behested contributions. A behested contribution is when a third party makes a donation to an entity at your request. The reporting required for behested contributions are for those that come from a single source and exceed $5,000 in a calendar year. The other core aspect of the Political Reform Act that you're all familiar with is that there is a prohibition against acting for personal benefit. And under the Political Reform Act, no public official shall make, participate in making, or in any way attempt to use his official position to influence a government decision in which he knows or has reason to know he has a financial interest. So note that this rule does not say that you only stand to gain financially, because the interest, the financial interest that is affected can also be a loss. A key thing to remember here is that the law is not just aimed at financial gain, but it's also aimed at avoiding the appearance of impropriety. So the rules force you to stay out of a situation when the public might think you're tempted to make a decision favoring your self-interest. Even if you think that you can act ethically in making a decision, you still might not be able to participate if your participation creates the appearance of impropriety. And so how do you determine if we have a disqualifying interest? These next slides are going to walk us through the FPPC rules for disqualification. First, we ask, is there a governmental decision involved? And this often is really easy to identify, right? You have, an example would be approving a contract. That clearly is a governmental decision. But it can also be a decision to not take action. For instance, it could be a decision to not adopt a certain policy. The second and more complicated part of this analysis is to look at whether the governmental decision might affect your economic interests. And economic interests are real property, sources of income, investments, business interests, and sources of gifts. David will go into gifts and the rules about receiving gifts in a lot greater detail later in the presentation. So for real property interests, those are interests that are worth at least $2,000 and are owned by you. They're owned by you and your spouse together, your spouse separately, or your dependent child. And it also includes your interest as a tenant, as long as it's not a month-to-month tenancy. Your economic interests also include, obviously, sources of income, which would be in an amount of $500 or more in the last 12 months. And these sources of income can be your salary from an employer. It can be promised income. It could be your spouse's income or even your dependent child's income. Also, investments worth more than $2,000 would be a financial interest. And you also have an economic interest where you are a manager or employee of a business, and this extends to that business's related entities such as subsidiaries or parent companies. So also you must consider, as I mentioned before, sources of gifts as an economic interest when determining whether to recuse from an action. And this would mean we would evaluate whether the action affects someone that has given you gifts. And then finally, most obviously, economic interests. You have an economic interest in your personal finances. So we look at whether a decision would cause you or your spouse or your dependent children to have some measurable financial benefit or loss. Under the district's ordinance code, in addition to the Board of Commissioners and the general manager, every designated employee must identify conflicts that might require disqualification. Those designated employees include the harbor master, the director of administrative services, the director of operations. But in addition, under the Political Reform Act, any district employee would be subject to the disqualification rules. So the FPPC has provided a 4-part test for determining whether you have a conflict of interest. First off, we ask, will the governmental decision result in a reasonably foreseeable financial effect on one of your financial interests? And so if the answer is yes, then we say, well, is that effect material? And if it is material, then we ask, is it the same effect that would be, that the public generally would realize? And if that's not the case, then you may not participate in or use your official position to influence the decision, unless we can find an exception under the Political Reform Act. Understanding whether the effect of a decision is reasonably foreseeable means that we just look at whether or not there's a realistic possibility that that outcome will occur. We look at the effect also if it's material for each type of financial interest. And then obviously a financial effect is not going to be material if it's nominal or inconsequential and significant. So I'll be running through a lot of rules that are kind of dry and very tricky, but the main idea to remember here is that when you're at the point of considering whether or not a decision will have a material effect on your financial interest, that's a time when you should be thinking about asking for legal assistance. And here, more time to be able to look at that is better, because there is no Jedi lawyer force that quickly gives us the answer. It's almost always a real complicated slog through tricky facts to find out if how material the interest is. All right, so now let's dive into the materiality standards a little bit more, starting with the materiality standards for business. If a business is directly involved in the decision, then it's presumed to be material. And this would be contracts between the district and a business. We just presume that if you have an interest in that business and the district's contracting with the business, that's material. Otherwise, we look at whether the decision will change the value of assets by at least, so if it's not a direct contract, we look at, well, is the decision going to have some sort of a change in the value of assets or liabilities by an amount that is at least $1 million, or will change gross revenues by an amount of 5% of gross revenues, which is at least $10,000. Also, a decision is material if it changes expenses by $250,000 or more, or 1% of gross revenues, which is at least $2,500. If the official's interest in the business is $25,000 or less, or if the official owns less than 1% of the business, then it would only be a material effect if there is a direct involvement between the business entity and the district. So let's apply this to an example for the Harbor District. Here we have Donald Duck, and he owns a business that manufactures some unique green hats. So any contract between the district and Donald's business is presumed to have a material effect on Donald's economic interest, and he must recuse himself from any action affecting that contract. So if the contract, if the district's considering entering into a contract to have all of their employees wear these unique green hats, then Donald must recuse himself from that decision. For other actions, of course, as we were mentioning before, we need to evaluate how the decision will affect his assets, liabilities, and gross revenues. So if the district was adopting a policy that just requires everyone who sells fish at Pillar Point to wear green hats that only Donald's business can make, it's very likely that this would affect his revenues in a way that prohibits Donald from participating in the decision. But here's an example where you can see how it helps to have time to work through all the facts to make that determination, because we need to understand what the gross revenue data was, what the sales forecasts are. So it's not an analysis that we could do just a quick few hours before the meeting. Here are the materiality standards for property interests. Again, if the property interest is directly involved, the effect is presumed to be material. And examples of property interest being directly involved in a decision are those where the district provides new or improved services to the property. And an indirect decision is one that affects use of the property that is near an official's property. There are exceptions for decisions that solely concern repair or replacement or maintenance of existing facilities that the harbor district owns. And there's also an exception for common interest areas in a common interest development. So an ownership there would not meet the materiality standard. So as part of the FPPC providing rules in their role and then changing them with some frequency, we have what you probably know as the 500-foot rule. And as the rule stands today, it provides extensive criteria for determining when a decision has a material effect on an official's property. And specifically decisions that affect property that is less than 500 feet from the official's property are presumed to have a material effect. And decisions affecting property that is greater than 1,000 feet from an official's property are presumed to have no material effect. But in the middle there, where property that the decision is going to affect property between 500 and 1,000 feet from the official's property, we need to evaluate how that decision will affect the official's property, including looking at how it will affect market value or the character of the property. So all that's very complicated. We'll provide a quick example for the Harbor District on how this works. Here we have Commissioner Lilo, who owns a kayak rental shop that's 20 feet away from district property with a boat ramp. So if the boat ramp if the district considers repairing the boat ramp, there is no conflict because this fills the exception for repairs and replacement of existing facilities. But on the other hand, if the district is considering installing a special kayak launch ramp that's next to Lilo's shop, then she must recuse herself. When leased by an official, there are 5 criteria determining when the decision will have a material effect. Include changes in changes that affect termination or changes that affect the rental value. For decisions that have a material effect on real property interests, there are exceptions for when a segment of the public be affected the same manner where participation is required. So this is the public generally and also the rule.
I can't hear Trisha.
Rule of necessity applies.
Trisha, I can't hear you and I can't see you either.
You're kind of weaving
Can't hear
out
me?
in terms of the sound, Trisha. It's almost like there's a weak connection or something. I can see you. Melanie,
Now,
can you see Trisha?
I can see her now, but it was like.
Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to classic Zoom problems here. I'm gonna shut off my my video and see if that helps. And if not, just pipe up and let me know again, and we'll try something else. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so what I was just discussing is the public general exception and then the rule of necessity. The rule of necessity applies when, because of conflicts, not enough of the board members can participate in order to make a decision. And in that case, you use some sort of a random selection process for determining who will participate so that the board can take action. And this can be something interesting like a draw of a high card or drawing the short straw. Is that better? Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, great. Okay, so if you are disqualified, because this part's important, if you are disqualified, you cannot discuss the matter You need to identify the nature of your conflict at the meeting and then immediately leave the chambers after making your statement. You can't avoid your obligation to make this statement by just simply leaving the room. There is an exception to leaving the room for when something is on the consent calendar. Let's see, I think I went too far ahead. Yeah, so if something's on the consent calendar and you have a conflict, you can just abstain from that item and make that announcement and then vote on the consent calendar. So if you must recuse yourself, you are still allowed to speak as a member of the public to represent your personal interests, but this is just for matters that relate to your property or to your business interests. Penalties for violation of the Public Records Act include invalidating the decision. It includes fines, includes loss of office, and obviously political embarrassment. So in summary, for questions about disqualification, it's good to talk to your general counsel. And if that doesn't work, you can, if the general counsel is not able to assist, you also can seek advice from the FPPC and request a formal advice letter if time permits. And always the best option is if you're in doubt and you don't have time to come to a concrete determination, you can just sit out the decision. So then the next key conflict law is Government Code 1090. And this law predates the Political Reform Act quite a bit. And as you probably know, Section 1090 provides that a government official may not make a contract in which he or she is financially interested. And in the following slides, I'm going to walk through what it means to violate Government Code Section 1090. So there are three parts to this rule. First, you have to be a public officer or employee. Second, you or your spouse have to have a financial interest in a contract that is coming before the district. And your financial interests are defined really broadly. It includes any situation where you or your employer may stand to gain or lose by making the contract. The financial interest can be direct when it involves you personally, or indirect, such as when it affects a company that you own or that you have invested in. And third, the contract must be made by the district. This is, again, a really broad term that includes not only voting to approve the contract, but also all of the steps that lead up to it, such as engaging in preliminary negotiations. So if all three of these parts are satisfied, the district cannot, this is unlike the Political Reform Act, the district cannot enter into the contract when a commissioner has a direct or indirect financial interest. But if it's a staff person who has the financial interest, that staff person can and must abstain for participating in making the contract. And it's very important that you do not participate in making a contract in violation of 1090, because 1090 violations can't be fixed. There are exceptions to this broad rule. First, there's the remote interest exception. And an example of a remote interest is a contract between the district and your landlord, or a contract between the district and an employee's spouse's business. For a remote interest, abstention and disclosure is required before the board takes action on the contract. Second, the second exception is to have a non-interest. And this is an example of a non-compensated board member of a nonprofit. So if you serve in that capacity, you would have a non-interest. And no interest, no abstention is needed, but you might have to provide some disclosure. And we typically take a really cautious approach to 1090 issues because the penalties are so severe. Again, you can't undo the mistake. The offending contract is not just voidable, but it's actually void. And willful violations are criminal and can result in you losing your ability to ever hold a public office. And finally, this is a tool that the DA will often use to prosecute corruption. So here's some defenses that don't work. It doesn't matter if the contract was fair or if the general counsel said that it was okay that you could participate in making the contract, or if you abstained from the decision. Still, all of those penalties apply, no matter if any of these factors were at work. All right, so we're just about finished with the first group of conflict laws. And the last rule that I'll cover is the prohibition against using your office to secure future employment. You cannot make, participate, or use your official position to influence any governmental decision relating to an entity with who you are negotiating for employment. So with that, I am going to turn it over to David to talk about the next group of ethics laws.
Okay, hi everybody. Let me get control of the remote, so give me 1 second.
Excuse me, can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a question. Do you folks, actually I have several questions, but do you want them asked at the end of this?
Commissioner Lorraine, is my preference is that there's a lot of material that we cover, that we're supposed to cover, that we're mandated by law.
Okay.
So I find that the best way to do this is to get through all of the material, because it might be answered by something, your question may be answered by something that we hit on at the later in the presentation.
Okay.
And then, yeah, and then we can address questions if we have time at the end. And then obviously, I see the benefit of having your general counsel provide this is that if you have any questions, you and I can talk afterwards. And oftentimes, I think ethics laws are just easier to discuss in the context of actual facts and kind of working through the facts. So I guess my point is, if we even don't get to the question at the end, I'm available always to talk with you about your questions and give it a real thoughtful response.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, and away we go. So here we are in the next section. And can everyone hear me all right? Just give me a thumbs up just to make sure everyone's still with us. You're not doing too much Amazon shopping as you're listening to this. I'm kidding, of course. But all right, so we're going to talk about gifts and perks. So this is a topic that I feel is always a good refresher for electeds and staff members who are under the auspices of gift and perks, because it comes up so often in your role as a public official. And so the kind of broad overview of if you will, of gifts and perks is: don't ever use your office for personal gain. Be mindful of perks given because of your office and a role. And remember what Tricia said, that these laws are sort of the floor and not the ceiling of recommended behavior, that you want to avoid the appearance of impropriety or bias, even if you are within the context of the law. Now, I always find that this section, if you're sitting here in this 2-hour training, it means that you are going to follow the rules of the FPPC and not take gifts. And so I feel almost bad having to cover some of this, but as Tricia mentioned, a lot of this is just required by law. So if you see me put up something like this slide, please don't be offended. Please don't think, how dare they, infer that I would ever take a bribe. We're required to tell you this. And so now you're being told, do not take bribes. But I think we all know that if you're sitting here in this training, you're not really the elected officials or the staff members that we need to worry about. It's the ones that, continually blow it off or think that they know better. So this goes without saying, don't solicit or accept contributions things of value, or payments in exchange for votes or other official action. We all know by reading the newspapers that there are just a ton of elected officials that we seem to read about almost monthly who were indicted by the FBI or their county district attorney for taking bribes on development projects, on kickback schemes, on permits. I mean, you name it. And we've got, you know, unfortunately, electeds and staff members who do crazy things, like this gentleman from Upland quite a while ago. What is a gift? So this is a good refresher. I know a lot of you have been commissioners for a long time, so I know you've done this training maybe 2, 3, 4 times, but it's always good to get the refresher. A reminder that a gift is anything of value for which the recipient did not provide payment or services of equal or greater value to the donor. So if you get something and you didn't return something of equal or greater value, that is considered a gift. Remember that a gift doesn't have to, you know, be a present, doesn't have to be wrapped up, doesn't have to be around the holidays. A gift can be many things. And I know that you will all relate to this. The biggest one that I always found when I was an elected official are the meals, right? Meals, food, and drinks. And it's not even the big ones. It's not even when you're at a conference or where you're speaking somewhere, you know, or if you're at a chamber event. It's the little things. It's when you go meet with somebody who wants to talk to you about something that's coming up before your board, and you meet them at Starbucks for coffee and they want to buy you a coffee, right? And we've all done this. They're like, oh, I got here before you, Commissioner, what do you have? And you don't want to be rude and be like, no, don't pay for my drink. But that is considered a gift. Okay, just so you're aware of it. Meals, foods, and drinks, things like entertainment. You know, if a friend or a colleague has extra tickets to the Giants or the Quakes, which I will come back to. I'm mentioning Quakes on purpose because it's going to factor into a story that I'm going to tell you all, a cautionary tale, if it were. Those all count as gifts. So sporting events, you know, plays to Hamilton, plays to see, a concert somewhere. If we ever get back to being able to do all those things, so those all counts as gifts. Raffle tickets. Okay, many of you may have been at a dinner where it's for a nonprofit that you really believe in, and somebody wants to gift you some raffle tickets because you're a commissioner. Those are gifts, so you got to be careful. Travel and lodging tickets go without saying, those are gifts. You know, if you ever get that invitation to go to Hawaii or go, you know, look at the harbor in Murmansk, Russia, that's going to be a gift if you go and you take that, you know, that tour. Now, who do the gift rules apply to? They apply to, obviously, board members. They apply to the general manager, the harbor master, and all these other folks listed in not only the district's conflict of interest codes, but under state law. So basically, if you were told to come to this meeting, then the rules apply to you. Okay, that's the easiest way. If you're here, the gift rule applies to you. Don't try to get out of it, okay? What is the gift limit? Okay, so this is a good one. All gifts worth $50 or more must be reported yearly to the fppc as a gift. So in your Form 700, if you received any gift worth $50 or more, you got to report it. The trick is too that they can be several gifts from the same source within a calendar year. So let's say that you consistently meet with, I don't know, Samcar. I know you're the board, the harbor board, so you're like, we're never going to meet with Samcar, they're realtors, but I'm kind of going off my experience. And you meet with our government affairs liaison on a monthly basis, and they buy you a coffee every time. And let's say they buy you, 12 lattes worth $44. Well, that aggregates. So if you take 4 lattes or 12 lattes worth $4 from the same person, that's $48. You're okay. The 13th latte, you got to report it. Now, I know you're all going to ask, like, well, does that mean that we have to keep track of gifts that we received from the same source for the entire calendar year? And the answer is, unfortunately, yes. So you got to remember, if someone buys you a sandwich in January and then you go out and you have a steak dinner that's, $49 and you forget about that sandwich in January, technically, if anyone ever found out, that could be a violation of not reporting the gift rule. I'll tell you a secret that I used when I was an elected. I just didn't take gifts. I didn't take them at all. I would not let a person buy me anything. If somebody wanted to buy me coffee, lunch, I would say, no, let's split it. No, I'm going to pay for it. And I would be real honest with them. I would just tell them, you know what, it's too much of a hassle for me to have to keep track of who bought me a coffee in February. And next March, when I got to fill out this Form 700, there's no way in the world I'm going to remember that you bought me this coffee in February. So I'm just going to pay for it myself and never have to worry about keeping track of this stuff. Other people I know were very diligent. They would keep a journal of all their meetings that they would write in when they received a gift. And then they would go home and they put it in a spreadsheet. I'm not kidding. We have colleagues who do this. So, you know, you can do it. It's doable, but keep in mind, these are the laws. You are absolutely forbidden from receiving a gift worth $520 or more from a single person or entity. So if you cross into the $521 zone, bam, you're stopped. You cannot receive any more gifts from that person for the calendar year. And people always ask, you know, does calendar year really mean calendar year? So yes, it does. If you celebrate, you know, Christmas or Hanukkah, and you've, you know, you get a nice gift for them, if it's over $500 or it's an aggregate of something you received through the entire calendar year, you cannot accept it. Now, there are exceptions, because I know if you're new to being an elected, or just as a refresher, a reminder that existing personal or business relationships do not count. So obviously, and we'll go through the family members that are exceptions. Long-term relationships, if you have a boyfriend, girlfriend, bona fide dating relationships count. One thing that we will caution you about is do not try to shoehorn existing business relationships into this long-term relationships, because we've seen electeds get into that trouble. You know, you get elected to the commission, you've been, you know, working in the community for 35 years as an executive for a company, you have a lot of long-term relationships, but now you're a commissioner, and those same business relationships may be coming to you because they need you to help them with certain issues. I would not count those as long-term relationships. Just because you've known them for a long time does not necessarily mean they are a long-term relationship, okay? It really is sort of a love and affection kind of thing, or family members who you may not have love and affection for, but are nonetheless your family, okay? So here's your family. These are the people in your family. And again, you don't have to love them, but they're your family. Your spouse, your minor child, your parents and in-laws, your siblings and in-laws, grandparents, grandchild, niece, nephew, aunt, uncle, first cousin, and the spouse of any of those people count as family. So if you receive gifts from those folks, you are fine, okay? There also is a gift exception for the holidays, okay? Remember I was talking about if you celebrate Christmas or Hanukkah, any gifts exchanged between a public official and another person other than a lobbyist, because lobbyists have their own strict protections about gift giving to elected officials, and they have to abide by those ethical rules as well. If you exchange holiday gifts, birthday gifts, similar occasions, you can exchange those gifts without triggering the gift reporting requirement, as long as the gift is not substantially disproportionate in value. If we had more time, I would ask for hands and ask somebody to tell me if they know what holiday is depicted here in this slide from the Star Wars universe. Rather than have you raise your hand, if anybody knows what it is, just go ahead and type it in the chat. And if you get it, you've just outed yourself as one of the biggest Star Wars geeks in the world. I know what it is, but I'm not going to tell you. So take a look at it for a minute, soak it in. If you know the answer, go ahead and chat it in, and then we'll come back to it later. But remember, anything for the holidays has to be equal or equal value, or not substantially disproportionate. And if you have any questions about it, you know what I like to tell people is you can always ask the attorney, but kind of common sense should prevail. Like if somebody gives you a really nice gift of like a cross pen, and you're digging through your purse or backpack to give them like a $15 Starbucks card because you forgot to give them something, it's probably disproportionate. But if you each exchange a bottle of wine, and they're both nice Napa wines, and you're probably okay. All right, moving on. There are other exceptions to and from the Harbor Board, or the Harbor District, excuse me. So any payments made to the district that are in the form of gifts to the district do not count as gifts to you. District provided tickets or passes. So if you get, if the district gets passes to the San Mateo County Fair, and Jim decides to pass them out to all the staff, and he includes all of you commissioners as, getting these free passes, those are fine. Employee raffles or gift exchanges. You all have a holiday party or end of the year party, and you want to do a nice raffle with your staff, or a gift exchange, a white elephant. That's all fine. You don't need to worry about reporting, those exchanges among, a district holiday or district party. Gifts from public agencies to agency officials, those are fine as well. One example I give, if any of you have ever been to the Progress Seminar, and PG&E or Recology is there, and they're handing out those swag bags in the hallways. If you want to grab the bag and then stuff it full of free pens and Hershey's Kisses, you're probably fine. I wouldn't go like, oh, I can only take $500 worth of Hershey's Kisses, and then I got to stop taking the Hershey's Kisses. You're probably fine. Okay, public agencies to agency officials, you're okay. And then group gifts. If there's a ceremonial gift that's somebody comes to one of your meetings and they give you all this very nice mug from their nonprofit, that they give to you, you don't need to report those. If it's a group gift, to the entire board, you're probably fine. No one chatted. No one knew that Star Wars. I've really outed myself on that slide. So that's unfortunate for me, but good for all of you that you spend your time more wisely than me, not watching too many Star Wars shows. Other exceptions that I'm going to blow over real quickly because they are so rare that if they come up, just ask Trisha. Home hospitality, contest prizes, awards of trophies, wedding reception food, disaster assistance, emergency leave, bereavement offerings, blah, 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 all of this. The two that I will kind of hone in on, because it'll happen, is you'll be you'll be somewhere, maybe you're doing something for like 4-H where they're doing some sort of harbor thing and they want you to come out and speak and the kids want to give you a little plaque. You don't have to throw the plaque back at the kids and be like, I can't accept this. I have to report it as a gift. You can accept a small award or trophy in the spirit in which it's presented. Same thing if you get invited to a wedding, don't, start cataloging. Do I need to report the, favor? If the favors are really nice, crystal bowl, then I want to go to the weddings you're going to, first of all, but you don't have to report those. The key is everyone getting it? Is it part of the actual wedding, or are you being singled out for, special favoritism because of your position, right? So keep in mind, you can hit the buffet hors you can hit the hors d'oeuvres, and don't worry about reporting all that. All right, watch out for weird valuations and reporting rules. And I'm just going to say for this one that, again, if something comes up where you're not feeling quite comfortable about how to value it or what to do with the gift, just call Trisha. Ask her. She can get me involved. She can handle it herself, whatever she wants to do, but that's what she's there for. Things like invitation-only events, large group gifts, anything that benefits your family or events that honor you or official or ceremonial functions, be on the lookout for those. Here is my gift to all of you. I'm going to share one of my embarrassing stories from when I was on the San Mateo City Council of how I got caught in these quirky valuation and reporting rules. So here I am. This is not me. I'm not in this photo, but here I am taking a photo. I know many of you thought I was maybe the blue guy in the back, but this is me at a San Jose Earthquakes soccer match with my daughter, who you should be able to pick out in this photo of which one is my daughter. She doesn't look like this anymore because this was like 5 years ago. She's here with her soccer teammates. They're on the field. They're taking a picture with the mascot. What had happened in this event is I was going to this game, minding my own business. I'm not on any official San Mateo City Council business. And I have my own tickets to the game, and I'm going with some buddies and their kids, and it's our soccer team, and we're all, or my daughter's soccer team, and we're all going to watch the Quakes. As we're walking into the stadium, I get a text from the president of the Burlingame Dragons. They were a semi-professional team that was in Burlingame for about 3 years, back until about 3 or 4 years ago. I became friends with him because I love soccer, but also that he had some questions for me about, trying to find a site for their team. So he'd obviously reached out to me as a council member in San Mateo, and we became friends. They ended up being in Burlingame. So I'm not thinking anything that I have a conflict because he's in Burlingame, I'm in San Mateo. He texts me as we're coming into the stadium, and he says, hey, are you at the game? We have a luxury suite, and you should come in and bring your friends and bring your girls and their team. And, we have extra room, extra food. And we're all thinking, great. And I'm in no way thinking that this is in any way related to my elected position, because it's not city business. They're not doing anything about city business. So we go there, we have a great time. We take this and many other cool pictures. And my daughter loves me more. And which father doesn't want their daughter to love them more? So it's just awesome, right? I'm thinking this is great. Middle of the match, I'm sitting there just eating nachos for free. And this guy sidles up to me and he starts talking to me about wanting to do some events in San Mateo Central Park. And I'm thinking, oh, crap. You know, now he's talking to me about business. Now I'm here in this luxury suite, you know, as a council member. And, you know, I think I'm subject to the gift rules because it was a long conversation. So what I had to do is, because remember, my limit at the time was $500. And the value of the suite for the ticket and the food was, in my estimation, probably going to be more than $500. So the first thing I did is I talked to my city attorney. Then I looked at the fppc rules after talking to my city attorney, and what we decided to do is I just went ahead and did the reimbursement. And this is what the reimbursement is. This is not like the rule Trisha talked about. So you kind of have an escape hatch. If you receive or accept a gift and you're deemed to be over the $520 limit, you can, within 30 days of receipt, not use the gift and return it, which wasn't, you know, applicable in my case because I'd already eaten the nachos and I wasn't giving them back. Or I could reimburse the donor. Okay. The other thing you can do is you can donate the gift to a charitable organization or government agency. So, you know, in your case, let's say you get a gift of a big screen plasma TV and it's valued at $600. You've already got it in your car. You realize, oh, this is a gift. You can donate it to a local charity, a Boys and Girls Club. If they need it, a YMCA, you can return it, or you can reimburse them the fair market value of that TV. Okay. So in my case, here's what I did. I called the Quakes the very next day. I talked to their ticket office. I said, what is the fair market value of one ticket in your luxury suites? They told me it was about $125. I took that and times it by the number of tickets that covered me and my kids, added the fair market value of the food that I ate based on whatever they listed as the food amount, and I reimbursed my friend $530 to get myself under the gift limit. Okay, so I cured and corrected it. I fixed it. These are the kind of things that will plague you as an elected, that do plague you as an elected, right? You just want to live your life. You just want to go to a game, but we are public officials always, and you always kind of got to be mindful of watching out for things like this. All right. Okay, we've already talked about all this, so that doesn't need to be talked about. Honoraria, I love this slide. I love talking about honoraria just because I don't understand why we still call it honoraria. It's like some 19th century term, and it basically says if you give a speech or publish an article, you can't take money for it. And they should just say that. So if you give a speech or publish an article, you can't take money. And if we were in the 19th century, it's called honoraria. I dare anyone to try to use that in a sentence in the real world and see what people say to you. All right, loans, I'm gonna go through very quickly. Please do not borrow more than $250 from any other coworker, any district officials, employees, consultants, contractors. You know, I don't think many of us nowadays, you know, say, hey, you know, I'm short $300. You know, Virginia, can you loan me $300? I don't think you do it, but if you think about doing it, please don't. Any loan of $500 or more from anybody must be in writing. If you don't pay the loan back or if it's forgiven, it becomes a gift. So it can create all sorts of trouble, okay? Obviously, don't worry about your mortgage. That's one that always new electeds come up with, like, oh my gosh, is my mortgage a loan? No. The easiest way to think about a lot of these rules are if you're not being singled out for special treatment because you're an elected official, it doesn't really apply. So mortgage for your home, credit cards, loan members from your family, you know, if your parents want to give you money to help your kids go to college or pay for graduate school, that's all fine. Okay, don't worry about reporting that. The other question that a lot of people will ask new officials is your miles, right? Your credit card miles. Do I have to give my credit card miles? Is it a gift if I, you know, use my miles to get a discount at my Hawaii hotel? No, it's all fine. Okay, don't bother Trisha with you know, mileage questions on your credit card. Okay. No free or discounted transportation. This one is big for you on the harbor board. You know, if somebody tries to give you free tickets for, you know, anything on any of your vessels or anything from Caltrain or, you know, Samtrans, don't accept it. And this does come up from time to time because every now and then we'll get a new executive officer at one of the transportation agencies and they'll think it's a great idea to hand out discounted or free passes to all electeds, right? A good, you know, just a goodwill thing because you all have to travel so much and we want you to be green. So it comes up. It comes up, I would say, probably every 5 to 10 years. And if it happens to you and somebody tries to hand you free vouchers, you know, free BART passes, let us know immediately. You can't take it. Now, interestingly, this only applies to board members. So, staff, I'm not going to get Jim angry at me by saying you should take them. I'll let Jim handle it on his own, but the law does not apply to employees, just to the board members, okay? And again, frequent flyer miles, don't worry about that. All right, that's it for gifts. You can ask me questions later if you have any questions about gifts. And like I said, I think gifts are the ones that come up the most. And so if you ever have any questions, let us know. I'm going to move quickly into public resources for political or personal purposes. I will say again, we are required by law to go over these slides. And so I mean no disrespect or to insult anybody. Obviously, no one here is doing any of this, will do any of this. So please don't think, why is he telling us this? What does he think we are, So obviously no mass mailings. You can't use staff. You can't use personal purposes for any personal purposes or campaign use, right? You can't ask John to run, 50 copies of your reelection flyer and pass them out at Oyster Point or Pillar Point. Just can't do it, okay? Obviously, don't run newsletters, mass mailings, constituent updates on the Xerox machine at the Harbor District office. Anything related to politics, to dealing with your constituencies, if it's not district approved and coming from the district, you cannot use, okay? Okay, see, this is all redundant. These are all slides again. We have to show you, don't campaign using district resources or staff. Can't use office space, can't use the copy machines, the phones, the computers. One thing that I will say, all levity aside, is sometimes people get in trouble, especially now, if you get a district issued cell phone or laptop, be careful with those, okay? All kidding aside, if you have a district issued laptop or cell phone, I would not use those for political purposes, okay? Don't check your email on it. Don't even load your email onto the laptop or that phone. Keep your own personal phone for your private email. If you're doing fundraising, anything like that. If you're endorsing people, have other electeds, if they want an endorsement, call you on your personal line, use your personal email. Do not give them your district email address, okay? Little things like that. I know it can be kind of annoying, but it's a good best practice. And once you start to do it, it's fairly easy to keep track of it. So be careful of the prohibition of the gift of public funds. And the way that this comes up a lot of times is less as individuals and more you collectively as a group, because you are all kind-hearted people, in doing something that gives somebody a break, but it constitutes a gift of public funds. And I'll give you an example. Let's say you have, a vessel in the harbor at Pillar Point Harbor, and you have slippage fees. And somebody comes to one of your meetings and she says, I am, a 75-year-old widow. I've had to move onto my boat. I cannot afford the slippage fee, but my husband and I had so many wonderful memories of being on this boat, and I just can't give it up. And I just want to keep the boat, but I can't pay the fee. The totally compassionate thing to do would be to say, well, is there a way we can help her out? And also a completely rational, compassionate thing to do would be to think, let's just waive her slippage fees. And we're the board, we can do that. Let's go do it. You actually can't, because if you show her favoritism over someone else, that would be a prohibition on gifts of public funds. Staff is very well aware of it. Jim will always steer you in the right direction. Tricia will steer you in the right direction, but just keep in mind that can happen. You don't have like a strong mayor or president system here. You all take turns being president, but it also comes up sometimes when a mayor has more executive power and they say, well, I'm just going to do it and I'm going to direct staff to do this. And you kind of get into trouble there. Okay. So be aware of that trap. It happens. And then again, not because of any nefarious intent. It's just because we're human beings. And sometimes we just want to help people. And unfortunately, sometimes we can't. Okay. Reimbursements, this part's going to go quick, and then I'm going to shoot it back to Tricia for the next portion. So these next 10 slides should go fairly quickly. If you have a reimbursement policy, follow the policy that Jim lays out for you, please. Follow his instructions on how to reimburse or use expense forms. If you get a district issued credit card, please be careful in their misuse. Don't succumb to the temptation to say, oh, I'm just going to buy some donuts for our Little League team and I'll pay it back, or I'll let Jim know, and then you forget. don't do it. Okay, it's a bad look. It puts everybody in a bad position. My personal practical tip is, as an elected, I never saw the need for an elected to have the district card. I much trusted staff way more to use those things than to me have one. I just said, no, I don't need it. So I don't know what your policy is at the district, but if you can, just try not to use it. If you misuse public funds, it can be pretty bad. It can be up to a $5,000 per violation fine. You might have to pay your own attorney's fees. You could be charged criminally with up to 4 years in jail as a felony for misuse of public funds. This is a pretty big one, right? People don't like when officials misuse public funds, so be very careful about it, which is why I say, if you can, don't have anything to do with district finances other than approving what staff gives you. All right, we're going to talk about government transparency and the Brown Act, and I've just lost control of my computer. Okay, let me back up. Okay, sorry, I lost control for a minute. I think I glitched. Okay, government transparency. I have about 5 more slides. I actually was misinformed. I thought these were just kind of boilerplate forms. These are actually kind of important, so I apologize. I'm going to speak for a little bit more. We're going to be covering the Public Records Act and the Brown Act. I'm going to cover the Public Records Act and pass it over to Tricia for the Brown Act. Public Record Act. You all probably know it more as a PRA, right? And you've all seen it. You've had people come and say, I want this under the PRA or the Public Records Act. You got to give it to me. And so we all sort of know what it is. It's when a person asks for a public record. A public record is any writing with information relating to the conduct of the public's business. It can include handwriting, photos, voicemails, drawings, emails, text messages, tweets, etc. So anything that you potentially tweet out, email out, text out is potentially a public record. Another tip is just sending it on your personal device does not necessarily insulate you from a Public Records Act request. If you send it out on your personal email or text and it has actual business related to the district, it could be subject to a Public Records Act. On the flip side, just because you send something out by your work or district email doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be public record. You know, we could do a whole seminar just on the Public Record Act alone. So I'll just go over this real quickly. And this is just what I said. Anything related to the public's business prepared and retained by the district, whether it's personal on your personal accounts or on your work email, could be a public record. This slide is really old. This was like back when people were still like, what is email? So I'm going to skip this one. Avoid combining public and private, right? So try to keep all your public business on your work email, your district email. If you need to talk about something with everyone else and you're changing topics, the best practice is to create a new email and not just continue to send down the same email chain by hitting reply all. Because if we get a public records request, we need to be able to sort out what is the scope of the request. And if it's all intermingled between 2 topics, we might have to do a lot of redaction, or some things may leak out that we don't want to leak out. All right, that covers me for now. I'm going to drop off. I'm handing control back to Tricia to cover the Ralph Brown Act. I will see you all in a few minutes.
Thanks, David. So I'm going to try using my video again. And if it starts to get broken up, just please holler out to me and I will shut it off to see if we can do a little troubleshooting on the internet. So it's easy to see why I was thrilled that David agreed to do this presentation with me. Not only does it break up the presentation of a lot of dry material, but David's got some really great insights because of his experience. And I don't know if you could tell, but I think he actually was a teacher before he was a lawyer. So he's a natural here. So I'm going to start with the Brown Act. And here's a picture of Senator Brown, who looks like a real nice guy. He's the one who authored the legislation in the 50s. And he authored the legislation in response to a series of newspaper articles about some secret meetings and discussions at the local government level. And the act was adopted not to try to stifle debate, but rather to make sure that public agency discussions are funneled into the public forum. And here's the operative provision of the Brown Act. All meetings of the legislative body of a local agency shall be open and public, and all persons shall be permitted to attend any meeting of the legislative body of the local agency, except as otherwise provided in this chapter. So there are 4 key parts to understanding the Brown Act. First is, who does it apply to? And the second is, what is a meeting? The third is, what rules apply to meetings? And then the last is, what happens if you violate the Brown Act? And we'll start off with, what is a legislative body? The Brown Act applies to legislative bodies, and that is the governing body of any agency, and it includes its subordinate boards or commissions, which are created by formal action of the governing body. It also includes standing committees that have a regular meeting schedule or a continuing subject matter jurisdiction. And what you know is ad hoc committees are not a legislative body, and these are typically advisory committees, and they will have a limited subject matter jurisdiction, and they are comprised of less than a quorum of the legislative body, and only members of the legislative body. So you couldn't have an ad hoc group that was 2 members of the legislative body plus the general manager, then it no longer is ad hoc. And again, an ad hoc committee would not be subject to the Brown Act requirements. So then the next item is, what is a meeting? And here are the elements of a meeting. The Brown Act broadly defines a meeting as a congregation of a majority of the members of the legislative body at the same time and location, but including teleconferences, to hear, discuss, deliberate, and take action on any item that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the legislative body. So here's what's important to point out, is that some people think that you can only violate the Brown Act if you're voting or taking some action on something in secret. But as you all know, that's not true. It's much broader. In particular, and this one always comes up on certain types of meetings, is, well, can the legislative body just get together and listen to a discussion about an issue, like an AB 1234 presentation? But even a congregation of a majority of the board to just listen to an issue within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board is a meeting that's subject to the Brown Act. So serial meetings are illegal meetings that often occur unintentionally. A serial meeting is when there is direct or indirect communication by a majority of the legislative body to discuss, deliberate, or take action on an item of business or potential business. So with a serial meeting, an illegal meeting can take place even when everybody's not gathered in the same place, in the same room. And there are 2 types of serial meetings. There is a chain meeting and the hub and spoke meeting. A really common example of a chain meeting is when Commissioner A would call Commissioner B to discuss a upcoming agenda item, and then Commissioner B calls Commissioner C to do the same. And at that point, now you've got a majority of the board that has directly or indirectly discussed an agenda item, and you have an illegal chain meeting. An example of the hub and spoke serial meeting would be when the general manager holds individual meetings with other members, with the members of the board, and wants to discuss their views on an upcoming agenda item. In this case, the general manager is the hub, and each commissioner is a spoke. So if a spoke finds out the view on the other spokes, that finds out about what the other spokes or commissioners think about an item that through the hub, the general manager, then this is an illegal serial meeting. Oh, all right, there we go. It's animated a bit. So illegal serial meetings, as you all probably know, have become much more prevalent and create more pitfalls with digital communications like email, text, and social media. But I have some tips for avoiding these pitfalls. First, and you probably all know this, is just don't ever hit reply all on an email. And if you're going to be communicating information, use the blind copy function to distribute something, because that prevents other people, the recipients, from hitting reply all and creating an unintentional Brown Act violation. Individual briefings are commonly used and they are legal, but in a legal individual communication, it has to be, the communication should be one direction, and it can't, again, describe the view of others on the board. And when you're receiving that briefing, you shouldn't be asking what other people are thinking about the issue as well. So the legislature just adopted some new social media rules, and those rules say that you cannot respond directly to any communication on an internet-based social media platform. If that is a post from a fellow commissioner on an issue of district business. So under these new rules, it only takes 2 commissioners to violate the Brown Act. You have one commissioner who makes a post and the other commissioner just responds to it, and you don't have 3 people, but under the new rules, 2 creates the violation. So my tip under these new rules is just don't respond to posts of a fellow commissioner. And responding to posts would include things like the use of digital icons by hitting the like button, or providing a smiley face to a comment. Again, it only takes 2 to violate the Brown Act here. So another tip is just avoid following other commissioners on social media. I guess I could see a situation where you're scrolling through your Instagram feed at night and you're looking at all the posts and you're hitting like, and then accidentally you hit like to a fellow commissioner's post, and you don't want to do that under this new rule. Social media is still valuable, as you all know, and so it is okay and can be used for commissioners to communicate with the public, to get information from the public, and to provide information to the public. It just can't be used as a way for an exchange of information among commissioners. So when is a congregation of a majority of the members of the legislative body not a meeting? There are several exceptions. So there's the individual contacts that I just mentioned. There's an exception for attendance at conferences and seminars. So if you wanted to attend a special districts association conference, you can do that without violating the Brown Act. Attendance at an open and noticed community meeting by a quorum of the body would not be a violation. Attendance at a meeting of another legislative body, when that other legislative body, say you all want to go to a South San Francisco city council meeting, you could do that. That meeting would be noticed under the Brown Act. And also you can attend ceremonial or social events. But the underlying principle still applies, which is if you're all at one of these meetings, you can't stand in the back of the room. 3 people can't get together and start, talking about something that is within the subject matter of the district. So again, this is real basic stuff, but when you do have a meeting, the Brown Act requires 2 essential elements: public notice and an agenda that adequately describes items to be considered. The type of notice that's required depends on the type of meetings. There's regular meetings, there are special meetings, which this is, and adjourned meetings, and then there's emergency meetings. Regular meetings are just your regularly scheduled meetings that occur at this regularly set time and day. And the agenda for a regular meeting must be posted 72 hours in advance of the meeting, and of course, briefly describe what's going to be discussed. The description doesn't need to include all the details of the item, but it must give adequate notice to the public so that they know what's being discussed and whether there's an action that's going to be considered. Special meetings are those meetings that are called by the president or a majority of the board. Special meetings are typically for just a few discrete issues, and notice is only required to be posted 24 hours in advance. And you need to provide that notice as you would, post it as you would for a regular meeting notice, and also you need to give it to any member or members of the press who've requested notice of special meetings. And an adjourned meeting is either a regular meeting or a special meeting that is adjourned to another specified time or place. There are special noticing requirements for an adjourned meeting, depending on when the next meeting will be held, where you post that notice and how you post it. Any meeting could be adjourned for lack of a quorum. So if no members show up for a meeting, the clerk or the secretary could adjourn the meeting without having somebody, one of the members there, to take that action to adjourn the meeting. So other agenda requirements include, let's see, that they must be posted in publicly accessible places. This includes posting on the website. And also they must be given to any party that requests copies of the agenda. And then, as you all know, that you can only discuss the items that are listed on the agenda. However, for a regular meeting, you can add items to an agenda, and this is under very, very limited circumstances. So an item can be added to the agenda and discussed at the meeting if this item came to the attention of the district after the agenda was posted, within that 72-hour time period before the meeting, and if it is absolutely necessary that the action is taken before the next meeting. This is very limited. It needs to be absolutely necessary. The board must make these findings, and then it requires a 2/3 vote of the board to add the item. In my experience, it just doesn't happen, because usually most items can wait for a special meeting, which only requires 24 hours notice. So other exceptions to the agenda requirement is that, you can have a brief response to public comments during the meeting. That doesn't need to specifically be on the agenda what you're talking to the public about. If it's just a brief response to their comments. You can ask questions seeking clarification on an issue from staff. So if something came up and you have a question about it, it's okay to ask staff to give a clarification. What we don't want to happen is that, one member asks a question about something and then another one says, well, that's interesting. I'd also be interested in, something else related to that. And then it looks like a Brown Act problem. So at that point, I would probably say, let's, end the discussion and put that on a future agenda. You can make obviously brief announcements and reports on activities of the members. You can have a request for a future report from staff. Again, if you want more information from staff on something, it's okay to pipe up during the meeting and ask for more detail to be provided in the future. And then you can also have a discussion about placing item on a future agenda item, on a future item on the agenda. Now, it wouldn't be a debate among the members, but somebody could, say, I would like to have that item placed on a future agenda. Okay, so then, as you all know, the Brown Act also requires or gives the public a right to speak. This is because the focus of the Brown Act is promoting public involvement in the government process. This means that you can't ban public criticism of district policies, procedures, or of district officials. State law also provides that a statement made by a member of the public at the meeting is privileged. And so you couldn't, if a member of the public says something that's false and awful, they really can't be held liable for defamation for those statements during the meeting. You can request that the public use speaker cards, but if somebody refuses to sign one and provide all of that information, you can't prevent them from speaking. So if a person wants to speak and wants to stay anonymous, that person should still be allowed to speak during the public comment portion of the meeting. The legislative body can, however, set rules for the conduct of the meeting, as long as those rules aren't related to the content of what the public's saying. And the most common rule that you're all familiar with is you can put time limits on speakers. And then there's also the ability to prohibit speakers from actually disrupting, disturbing, or impeding the orderly conduct of a meeting. But the bar for what is considered actual disruption is extremely, extremely high. So there is a recognition that not all matters can or should be discussed publicly. So for this reason, the Brown Act allows closed sessions for very limited purposes. And those items are personnel matters, labor negotiations, real property matters, and pending, threatened, or contemplated litigation. And the point of these exceptions is to allow the legislative body to discuss these items in a manner that doesn't prejudice or compromise its ability to bargain, because they are bargaining on behalf of the public. So you want them to be able to bargain a good deal for the public. So you don't want open meetings to be out to the board to have to pay the price of having an open meeting on something that in the end forces it to have a bad deal. So for example, it would be really hard for the board to effectively negotiate a price to purchase property if it had to say in open session what the maximum amount the district is willing to pay for the property is, because the sellers then going to know that, well, if they're willing to pay that amount, I don't know why I would give them a deal. So, that's the reasoning behind closed sessions. It's not to keep things from the public that the public needs to hear, but it's recognizing that it really serves the public interest to discuss things privately. So there can be civil or criminal enforcement for violations of the Brown Act. The civil action would be a lawsuit to invalidate a decision or to mandate compliance. But the first line of defense here is always an opportunity to do a cure over. So you get notice and an opportunity to cure. But if you choose not to redo that action, then you could be sued to unravel the action or to compel future compliance. And then there's also criminal penalties if the challenger could prove that there was some intent to deprive the public of information. An example of how this can play out, let me go to the next one here. So an example of how all this can play out is the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum Commission's months of closed session deliberations on USC's lease of the stadium, which is actually a taxpayer-owned stadium. So the exception, as I mentioned before, for allowing for discussions of real property matters is extremely limited, and you can only discuss the price in terms of payment. However, in this case, this commission was discussing the lease terms, but they also were discussing plans to give themselves free USC football tickets. And in that case, the judge said that they had driven a Mack truck through the real property exception under the Brown Act. And the judge was prepared to issue an injunction to restrict what the commission could discuss in closed session. And the judge was willing to require that the commission record all of its closed session meetings for up to 3 years. So it's important to stay within those real limitations of what you can discuss in closed session and make sure that the discussions are really to improve your bargaining power, but not to improve your ability to attend football games. So now we're in the home stretch here, and I'm going to kick it back over to David to discuss the last group of laws, which relates to fair process.
All right, everybody, here we are. We're in the home stretch. Just so you know, by looking at the clock, I don't want to jinx things, but we are on target to close out right at 3 o'clock. I should finish in about 15-20 minutes with some time for questions. So having said that, now, we're going to go another 2 hours probably. So let's see what happens. All right, here we go. Let's see. All right. Group 4, our last set of topics is on fair process laws. Now, what are fair process laws? Fair process laws are common law conflicts in due process, campaign contributions, qualifications for office and incompatible offices, and competitive bidding. As I've said a number of times, we are required by law and you are required to receive this training. So some of these slides may seem very, commonsensical, but again, I'm going to go through them because you're required by law to hear it. So here we go. Due process clause says no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. That's in the US Constitution. Basically, for us or you as local government officials, anything where you are judging a person's right to use their property or get a license, receive a permit, implicates their due process rights, and they have a right to due process. Same thing with terminating or disciplining certain employees. So what does due process mean? I mean, it basically means that you have to give a person reasonable notice, you have to give them an opportunity to be heard, and it has to be before an impartial decision maker. Now, that last one I'm going to repeat because I know you all know it, but it bears repeating. They have a right to be heard before an impartial decision maker. And this is an important distinction for you as commissioners because, as you all know, there's a difference between setting policy on what the district is going to do for the general public, where you are for or against a certain style or culture at your harbors, and providing due process and remaining impartial when a member of the public is seeking a license or some permission from the district to do something. They are two entirely different things, okay? And I know you all know that, but it's important to remember that distinction. So what is an impartial decision maker? It's somebody who does not have any pre-existing views on an issue before them. And if they do have pre-existing views, to make sure that those views do not create a disqualifying bias, okay? So it doesn't mean that you have to give up everything you've ever known in your life. It doesn't mean that if you've spent your entire life down at the coast that you have to give up all that valuable wisdom. Those are the things that we expect as leaders of our harbor board to have that experience to help guide you in making decisions. All it means is that you will not use that to prejudge an issue, to have a bias towards or against somebody in making a decision. So to have a disqualifying bias, you have to have concrete proof of a specific prejudice against a person that is the subject of the decision, or a bias which is sufficient to impair the decision maker's ability to decide the matter on appropriate grounds. Those are the legal terms. I mean, we are all adults, and so the common sense version is, if you have a strong feeling one way or the other about the person and it renders you unable to make a fair decision, whether you agree with it or not, you probably have a disqualifying bias. I mean, that's kind of how you distill all this legalese down. If you have some history or sense that you just don't like something and you don't think you can be fair, you have to declare a bias. There are a number of cases in the court systems just full of commissioners, council members, elected body members who prejudge an issue, writing in a newsletter, putting on social media, calling, somebody's project, a threat to the wildlife corridor, the worst thing that can ever happen to the harbors of San Mateo County, right? Anything where you're expressing a strong opinion on an issue that's going to come before the council, I urge you to think about it very hard before you issue that opinion, especially when it is an individual seeking some permission or license from the harbor board. If you're in your mind, like if you hear, let's say Jim is talking to you and he says, oh, we were getting a permit from, the commercial fishing industry, they want to get a permit to hunt for whales, right? Everyone's going to be like, that is the worst idea ever. This is not the 18th century. I would urge you to take a deep breath, and say, okay, we're going to wait until they come with that permit, and then we're going to hear them out. We're going to give them due process, and then we're going to make a decision. Okay. Doesn't mean, all of this doesn't mean you can't have your opinions. It just means that you have to give them the hearing that they deserve and keep your mind open before you make the decision. Okay, Fairfield versus Superior Court is another case where talked about campaign statements, because a lot of electeds will come and they'll say, well, wait a minute, I made all these pronouncements during my time in running for council or board, the commission, and am I going to be excluded now from ruling on any of those things if I took a strong position on things? No. So this case, Fairfield Superior Court says that the courts expect local elected officials to express their views to their constituents on issues of policy and public controversy. So if there is a heated issue about the best way to use public funds in the harbor district, you're expected as a leader and a public official to state those opinions, especially when you're seeking re-election. Again, though I sound like a broken record, I would urge caution that if you're talking about a specific project, a development project, a fishing license, anything, and it's campaign season, I would still urge you to say, you know what, I'm gonna, keep silent on that because it's gonna come before the board. And when I win election and I'm on the board, I don't wanna have been found to have prejudged the issue. One of the best examples I can give for all of us who live in San Mateo County is the Cargill Salt Ponds in Redwood City. Right, that thing has been going on forever. I'm not even sure if it's still going, but when it was going, it went through various election cycles. And I remember talking to some of those Redwood City Council members, and a lot of them took the position that even in campaigning, they weren't going to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down on that project. Fairfield versus Superior Court said they probably could do it, but they just thought, for appearance's sake and to abide by the letter of the law, we're going to avoid talking about it, even in the context of campaigning. And it can be hard, right? We know it can be hard because if you have an opponent, if you're an incumbent and you have an opponent, a lot of times they'll say almost anything to try to win the election. But as an elected, you have to sort of be bigger than that. And you have to say, no, duty comes first, office comes first, district comes first, fairness comes first. There's this thing called the common law doctrine against conflicts of interest. Common law basically is something that isn't written into the statutes or ordinances, but it exists by court decision. So the courts at some point have ruled on something declaring it a conflict of interest, but it doesn't appear in our statutes or laws, but they still are laws that you have to follow. So real quickly, The one that's most important for all of you has to do with location of your residence or business in declaring a bias. And the case in point is this case Clark versus Hermosa Beach. The Clark family had a duplex. They wanted to do a remodel. They wanted to build like 35 feet up. One of the council members for Hermosa Beach, Robert Benz, lived, as you can see, a city block from them, and the build out would have blocked his view of the ocean. But Councilmember Benz did not own the building. He just rented the apartment, and the Fair Political Practices Law at the time did not prohibit or declare a conflict for somebody who rented, only if you own the residence and own the property. And so the city attorney said there's no conflict, and Councilmember Benz voted on it. It went up to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal said, no, Councilmember Benz, even though he wasn't subject to the Fair Practices Act or the Political Reform Act, still had a conflict. So just because something isn't in the law doesn't necessarily mean that it might not be a conflict under case law. Rather than have you worry about whether something is or isn't in case law, I would urge all of you to talk to Tricia if you have an issue or a concern. Talk to Jim if you have an issue or concern. But also don't forget your common sense. You know, if you have a business and you know your first reaction to something is, oh, well, that's going to hurt me, that's probably a good indicator that you have a conflict, or you may have a conflict, right? If you live somewhere or rent out office space and something in the district, Harbor District, is going to affect you, and your first thought is, ooh, you know, that's going to hurt me, you probably have a conflict. Okay, so don't please forget your common sense. Okay, and that's kind of what this slide talks about. If you don't think you can be fair, don't participate. Remember what Tricia said. I love her saying, the laws are a ceiling or are a floor, not a ceiling. They should guide our minimum practices, but in many cases as an elected, sometimes for appearance's sake, for ethical sake, it's better to just err on the side of caution and declare a conflict. When judging any issue before the body, avoid making statements until you are in the hearing with the rest of your commissioners to express how you plan to vote or what you think about the project. All right. Make your decision based on the evidence presented that you hear from staff, parties, and the public. One thing that I know all of you do, but I have seen some electeds don't do, is if you have something that you want to have considered, don't wait until the night of the hearing to bring it up. Get it to Jim, get it to staff who's handling the issue, get it to Tricia and say, hey, you know, I know that there's this issue that I've been thinking about. Is it in the packet? Because if it's not, I can't consider it. And is there a way to get that information so we can get it in the packet so that everybody can look at it? And please note, I'm not urging you to become a private investigator and go out on your own and figure this out. That's what staff is for. But if you think as you're reading a packet on an issue up for hearing and you don't have what you want, do not wait until the night of the hearing. Contact staff immediately and say, hey, I'm looking at the packet and I don't see this and I want to consider it. Can we get it to the rest of the commissioners in time for it to be considered at the hearing? And if they can't, then staff will know what to do. They'll know to continue it, they'll know to move it, or they'll tell you, you know, here's what we can or can't do. Okay, that's it. Just a practical tip for all of you. Again, what I just said, if you do decide to make private site visits, don't comment on anything. Don't talk to people. One of the things I like to do is I will admit, I went out to sites sometimes because I wanted to see what was I wanted to look at the story polls or whatever they were putting up if they were getting a permit. And I would just stand there, mute, not say anything. And homeowners would sometimes come out and neighbors would come out and they'd want to talk to you. If you go out to the harbor and you're, thinking about, redoing the boat launch and you want to go look at it, that's fine. But if people come out and they talk to you, one of the things I would do on a regular basis is I would tell them, thank you for giving me your opinion. I urge you to send those opinions in writing to our staff so they can incorporate it into the packet when this is going to be decided. I am not going to give you any comments or questions on my opinion about this because I have to be fair to all sides. And so I'm not going to make any comment about it. I'm not being rude. I just have to be silent on this until it comes before the full commission. And people mostly respect that and understand when you say that. If you do say something, immediately disclose it at the hearing, or better yet, disclose it as soon as you do it. Let, again, staff know, let Jim know, so that they can get it in the packet and send out a notice to all the other commissioners that information was disclosed off the record. Okay, campaign contributions and lobbying. There's generally no conflict of interest for receiving campaign contributions. You do not have to declare conflict on everybody who contributed to your campaign or reelection campaign. The special rules for appointed boards and commissions, I apologize, that information is for another entity. And so you have your own rules for the Harbor Board on campaign contributions. This is a big one. Government Code 3205 prohibits you from soliciting campaign contributions from Harbor District staff, officers, or employees of the agency. You can't, walk around the office being like, hey, we've had such a great time the last 4 years. Let's do it again. Everybody pony up $100. Unacceptable. And it's a huge violation of the law. One of the exceptions to that, well, first of all, it's a misdemeanor. There is an exception if you send a mass mailing out to, a large group of constituents or the public, and a few people who are also employees of the district happen to be in that, that's okay. Again, I would urge you, the best practice is that if you have somebody who works now for the district, I would just take them out of those lists. Just don't even mess with it. Any employee should be considered off limits from any political pressure or request for contributions while they work for the district. I had situations where I had friends who supported my campaigns, and then they got a job with the city, and I took them off the list. And then they said, I want to donate to you. I said, don't bother. I don't need the headache. You don't need the headache. Let's all just not have a headache. Limitations on lobbying. So this applies to all of you as elected commissioners and to Jim as the general manager. If you leave the employment, or once you stop becoming a commissioner, there is a 1-year ban on your ability to come back before the board to lobby on any issue. So what I like to tell folks is, once you leave the commission and you get the goodbye and you get your cake and you walk out the door, don't come back for a year. Just don't. Avoid even coming to watch meetings. Like, don't watch meetings, because you may be tempted to chime in to say something in public comment. And if you do, you could be seen as lobbying. I had that advice given to me. So once I left city council, I literally did not go anywhere near City Hall. I didn't go to any meetings. I just stayed away. I was like, I'm done, right? That's a pretty hard and fast rule. And again, that's to avoid undue influence from your former colleagues who may want to do you a favor because you guys served on the commission together. All right, conditions to holding public office. This one, let's just go through it. You got to live in the county. Any questions about that? Should be very clear. And I know you all just went to district elections, so now you got to live in the district where you sought election. I don't even feel the need to go through all this. I mean, if you are, so eager to serve on the district board and you don't live in the county, then, you should watch more Star Wars movies. You really should. They're really good movies, and not enough of you are watching them because nobody knew the answer to my slide. So if you have that urge, just watch more movies and don't commit a felony, please. Incompatible offices. Again, if you are in this position, and I know one of our commissioners, our president, does have 2 offices, and I'm sure she went through the county and talked to the board of registrars to make sure it wasn't incompatible. If you run into that issue, you can talk to the president, but also you talk to the registrar of voters. They won't let you run for 2 incompatible offices. So don't just file and don't tell anybody. Just check with them. Check with Trisha if you run into that. Competitive bid. We're in the home stretch. I mean it now. We're got 2 slides left. So hang in there. We're almost done. Competitive bidding says everyone has a right to bid competitively. I mean, it goes without saying, don't get your favorite uncle's boat waxing business and, steer a contract to them. Just don't, okay? Use your common sense. Contracts have to go to the lowest responsible bidder. You have a wonderful staff here. They know all this. So lean on your staff. Again, do not try to go around them. Do not try to steer any business to the harbor board. Common sense. All right. I think I am done. Let me see. I'm going to hand it back to Trisha for the wrap up.
All right. So I just wanted to touch on 2 things that David mentioned. First of all, as attorneys, usually our cases are really bland and boring. And that Clark Hermosa Beach case has a set of facts that are so colorful, and I couldn't even repeat them here, but the extent of this person's dislike of the neighbor was pretty extraordinary. And if you ever wanted to read an interesting case, that would be one. And then the other thing I wanted to just point out is that with the rules regarding due process, that that doesn't come up a lot for the district, because the due process, as David was saying, relates to decisions that deprive a person of liberty or property. And so, you know, this would come up a lot if you were doing, you know, land use entitlements and things like that. But most of the harbor board's decisions are just legislative decisions that are not just, but they're legislative decisions, and they're not the same due process concerns. So you are able to have a, you know, you're able to kind of have your own opinions going into a policy issue that you're going to approve, or typical contract issues. Those the disqualifying bias that would deprive somebody of their property or liberty rights just wouldn't apply in those circumstances. So here we are, trying to sum up all of this information, and there was a lot. As you can see, that public service ethics are governed by a whole lot of rules, which are complicated. And so in a uncertain situation, I think it would be helpful just to ask yourself some basic questions. What would make the public feel the best or inspire confidence? What would you want to read about on the front page? And how do you want to be remembered? Again, this is going to, you know, we provided you all these laws that are the floor here, but you really should be thinking about what is the public perception of what's happening. And the answers to these questions will often help guide you in the right direction. But sometimes just asking those questions won't get you all the way there. So when there is doubt, always seek help, because many of these rules, as we are pointing out, have some pretty severe penalties and can be embarrassing. So, you know, the resources available to you are to talk to me, or you can seek advice from the FPPC. And also the Institute for Local Self-Government has a website with lots of great resources. And with that, I think we've covered all of the required AB 1234 material, and I thank you for your attention. We got through quite a bit, and I think there is time for a few questions if the president would like, or I will defer to President Chankrali on how you want to proceed now.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much, Tricia and David. It's good to see you. I'm glad that you're working together, because we really appreciate all the work that RWG Law has done. One thing, Tricia, that I thought that we might touch on that probably isn't in your standard presentation is board conduct to one another. Ethical, unethical. I mean, I don't even know how that fits in. Is that something that you can talk about for just a few minutes? And I'm not sure where that would fit into the presentation.
Right. You know, I think that kind of weaves in throughout all of these, you know, references to when you are performing your functions as a board, you know, be thinking about how the public is perceiving what the board is doing. And while there aren't many laws that can constrain bad behavior, there is just generally a desire to be earning the public's trust and confidence in the way you interact. So yeah, so why I don't, you know, it's not specifically part of the presentation and I don't call that out directly. I do think that that is one of the underlying considerations when throughout we're kind of emphasizing that the purpose of these laws are to instill public confidence in institutions and to encourage people to act in a way that has the public's interest at heart. So, yeah.
Thank you. I know that Ed had some questions, so I'll just open it up to commissioner questions and comments. Ed, did you want to start off since you had some questions right after the first section?
I did, but I think we don't have enough time to go into answers because they tend to be complicated. And I do have, yeah, I don't think there's time if we're going to close at the hour. Only have a few-
And
Well, I mean, no, I think it's a minimum of 2 hours. So if you
Oh.
think that there's a question that might be beneficial to the rest of the commission, I mean, I would like to hear it just because I think that we can all learn a lot from each other and just, based on what we've heard today.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks.
My first question is that our attorneys work to protect the district. And so I guess is a question for the attorneys is, it seems that there may be situations where a commissioner should ask an attorney that's representing them questions about Brown Act or others. And is there a way that counsel for the district can guide us with those kinds of questions?
yeah, I mean, I think that questions about whether or not there's a Brown Act issue or whether or not there is some disqualifying interest are relevant to providing advice to the district because if there is a Brown Act issue, it's the district that's violated the Brown Act potentially. And so you want to make sure that all discussions are taking place in a manner that's consistent with the Brown Act. And then similarly, with some of those rules related to disqualifying interests, if you take an action that, if you've taken an action in your private interest and you violated one of those rules, then the contract could be void. So again, that's not in the district's interest. So there is lots of instances where a single commissioner is asking a question, but that question is relevant to how the board all operates together as a whole legislative body to conduct the district's business.
Understood. The question I have, though, would relate to if there was a conflict between protecting the district's interests and protecting the commissioner's interests. I guess it's another way to ask the question would be, is it incumbent on the district's council to say, in the case of there might be a conflict, to explicitly declare that there is a conflict and that the commissioner or staff person should find another source for information?
Absolutely. So I think that if I'm having a discussion with a commissioner and it sounds like, this isn't me, my client is the district, and what you're asking me is for advice about you in your personal capacity, I would always say that I can't advise you in your personal capacity and you need to seek your own counsel because my client is the district.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Bill? I think Bill's still, yeah.
Oh, I was muted there. No, I have no questions. Great presentation. Really, really very informative.
Nancy or Tom?
I agree. Thank you so much, Tricia and David. That was really the most interesting of the 4 ethics reviews that I've endured. Today was fun.
Endured. I think that's a good word to use. And I can't thank David enough for participating with me because it's a long presentation, lots of material. And it's great to share it with somebody. And it's also great to share it with somebody who has such interesting things to offer up that's very relevant to all of you from his background. So thanks to David.
Well done.
Tom? I don't know if he, and I know that the training applies to staff too, including Julie and Jim. So if you have any questions to ask of Trisha and David, probably now is the time to do so.
And President Chankrali, I will be working with Melanie to get the certificates to everybody who is required to take the training so that they can certify that they've completed it.
Okay, great. Okay, John, do you have any go ahead.
President Wright, I have a question for David, if he can clarify a point for me.
Sure, go ahead.
Dave, you mentioned that when you took your luxury box that you, I think you inferred that you paid down the gift, or did you pay the total value of the gift?
I paid it down to get it under the $500 threshold. And then
So under the state laws, you can pay a gift down.
Yeah.
Under federal law, we're prohibited from doing that federally, but
yeah,
that's a big difference between the federal and the state law then.
Yeah, I checked with my city attorney, and basically I checked with FPPC too, because I was terrified. So I didn't know if I had to pay the whole thing, and FPPC informed me that I could pay it down to get it under the $500 threshold. So I got it down to about 380. It just worked out. I got it down to about 380 just to give myself some cushion, and then paid whatever I said. I paid the 520 to get it under the threshold.
When I got involved in an ethics violation or situation, I wasn't so lucky. I had to pay the full tab.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
You know who was really angry? My wife. She was livid because like we originally bought like $20 tickets, and that little jaunt cost me like $800.
God.
Oh,
But my daughters love me. My daughters.
I can say your daughter loves you.
You can't.
Thanks,
There's
David.
no price for a daughter's love.
That's worth more than $800, David.
Hey, so David, what holiday was that?
Oh, okay. So I know people need to go, so I'll keep it real quick. So that was the 1977 Star Wars Holiday Special. It's the Wookiee Life Day, and it was in the holiday special that only aired once in 1977 because it was so bad that George Lucas, as soon as it aired, ordered all the tapes to be brought back. So they gathered back all the film, and there's no copies of that out there anywhere. There's a few pirated bootleg copies on YouTube and eBay. I bought a VHS copy back in 1999 or something like that. So I have a copy of it, but you'll never see it again. It's not in public. It was a horrible, horrible, weird TV production. But if you're a Star Wars aficionado, on the day that it premiered, which was the day after Thanksgiving or something like that, it's called Life Day, and Star Wars nerds everywhere will wish each other Life Day. And it was basically them trying to get Chewbacca home for Christmas. It was horrible. It had Dionne Warwick sang a song in it. Art Carney was in it. It was weird. You know, it's kind of like those 70s variety shows that we all remember, right? Like the Carol Burnett show. It was random.
We might win a trivia contest with this information now, so thank you.
Yeah, if you ever do another holiday party when the pandemic lifts, you can ask Trisha to borrow my tape, and you guys can watch the holiday party and see who lasts the longest. No one ever can watch the whole thing straight because it's so bad.
Is this meeting going to be on our website or no? Jim?
As part of the district policy, it's a public meeting, so we'll be posted
Okay.
to the
Okay.
website.
Any other questions or comments? Tom, I don't know if you have any. Okay. Nope. Okay, well, just a reminder then, thank you again, Trisha and David. Please respond to Jim's emails regarding February 10th as a special meeting date. And if there are no more questions or comments, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn, but Jim, do you have your hand up, or is that an artifact?
It's a Star Wars artifact.
I raised my hand earlier to get the attention. I will lower.
Oh.
All right, I move
Is
to
there-
adjourn.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, roll call, please.
Commissioner Lorenz? Oh, you're muted.
Aye.
Commissioner Zemke?
Aye.
Commissioner Ryring?
Aye.
Commissioner Chankrali?
Aye.
Commissioner Mateusz?
You're on mute,
You're
Tom.
muted too, Tom.
Anyway, okay. it
I guess
doesn't-
he's,
It's, put a thumbs up for an eye.
A yes hand in sign language.
Yeah, can you put a thumbs up for an eye? Well, anyway, it's okay. Anyway, we have 4 votes, so I think Tom's ready to adjourn. So anyway, the motion carries, and we look forward to seeing everyone on February 10th, I hope. So just get back to Jim.
Have a good weekend.
All right, take care.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.